This is Telewizja Republika. This is a house of freedom and free speech. Michał Rahan, welcome to our station. Our guest tonight, Ben Habib, great to have you on our program. Former MEP, great friend of Telewizja Republika, entrepreneur, businessman, and a man who knows a lot about the relations inside Europe and outside Europe right now. Great to have you on our program.
Well, thank you very much. This is my first time on Polish television, and I'm flattered to be asked. Thank you very much, Michał.
Ben, you've been a member of European Parliament in a very interesting period, in the time when Great Britain was actually outside of European Union, but technically it wasn't outside the European Union. When we look at your Twitter or your X handle, you mentioned Brexit being the reason for which you, people who are citizens of Great Britain, wanted to have a proud and sovereign Great Britain that you were denied of. Could you explain, could you emphasize on that and try to explain our viewers?
Sure. So, I went to the European Parliament in order to seek our withdrawal from the European Parliament. I only got into politics because I could see that the direction of travel of the European Union was ever increasingly to the detriment of what the nation state of the United Kingdom, that it was hollowing out our nation state. It was overtaking our democracy. It was dumbing down our ability to make policies which suit the British nation and the British people. And power was effectively being sucked out of London and to Brussels to our great detriment. And I came to the conclusion that there was no option but to enter the political fray in 2019. I hadn't been in politics before 2019, but Theresa May, who was our Prime Minister then, and had already been working, trying to leave the European Union since we voted, as the British people did in 2016, to leave, had completely failed to deliver. And so I thought, well, you know, if people like me don't stand up and don't do what's right for the country, then our country will be lost. The British people voted to leave the EU. That democratic decision has to be respected, and everyone who believes in democracy, believes in the United Kingdom, I felt had a duty to stand up and be counted at that time, which is why I got elected to the European Parliament. And then I spent the next 7 months making myself a great nuisance to the European Union.
When you were a member of European Parliament, you were supporting Polish politicians from PiS
I was.
party. Yeah, and it was a very interesting period and a very interesting time because of the big debate that actually started over back then in Poland. We are in the European Union since 2004, and I remember being, as a young man, big supporter, big fan of joining European Union. Now, when the time passed, I got lots of doubts. And when I look the videos, the reels of Margaret Thatcher back in the 80s, she was actually predicting things that are happening right now.
She was extraordinary. The way she could see what was going to unfold with the European Union was amazing. She could see it all in the 1980s, even before the Maastricht Treaty, before the Lisbon Treaty, you know, before the European Union began to show itself as being desirous of being a nation state in itself, you know. And so Maggie's phenomenal. She did, of course, support us going into the European Economic Community, which was not brilliant. But I think by the time, you know, we got to the 1980s, she could see clearly the malign direction in which the European Union was heading.
So what do you make of it today? When you remember your discussions with the members of European Parliament, when you remember Polish politicians who are answering easy questions, because this is an easy question. If you are a politician of a sovereign state and you are being lectured by politicians of some other even not state, an organization, that, for example, your Supreme Court shouldn't be the court of last word in your state because there is some other court, European Court of Justice, who should have the final say on whether you can do something or cannot do something.
So
what's your take on this from the perspective of the time you spend over there?
So let's forget about all the European treaties. Let's forget about all the bureaucracy, all the detail. Let's take one step back and look at what is the European Union. The European Union, in essence, is an organization designed to strip power away from nation states. Its very existence is determined by its ability to make regulations and laws, and by definition, therefore, it can only discharge its raison d'etre if it is taking power away from nation states.
It isn't mentioned officially. No one officially claims that this is the logical consequence of existence of entity like European Union.
No, it isn't, but we all now can see what they're doing. And in the pursuit of taking power away from nation states, there is only one inevitable outcome, which everyone in Poland, everyone in every EU member state should wake up and realize. When you take powers away from the democratic unit that is Poland, or the democratic unit that is Germany or France, you effectively are attacking the existence of that nation state. That nation state ceases to have the same efficacy that it had before those powers were removed. And as the European Union progresses, it's taken even more, it increasingly takes powers away from nation states. Every crisis we've had in the last 40 years, the EU tries to take more power. Every opportunity it sees, it takes more power. And of course, I think the most stark and visible example of what I'm talking about is the Schengen zone. Now, the young across Europe believe the Schengen zone to be a phenomenal thing because they can have cappuccino in Rome, and then they can come and have, steak frite in Paris without having to show a passport. And that's great. But the cost of removing borders is the removal of the existence of nation states. So if you believe in Poland, if you believe in Germany, and you're a German, you believe in Germany, or you're a Frenchman and you believe in France, you have to stand against the direction of travel of the European Union. They are mutually opposed ideologies and beliefs. You cannot be a nationalist, you can't be a patriot and be a believer in the EU.
The funny thing is that the very idea that was behind the creating of European Union as a union was to create a kind of joining or kind of cooperation of states that try to reach common goals in terms of trade and movement of people. But now we are talking about all new dimensions of functioning of European Union. We are talking about the creating a single European legal system. We are talking about the even single European voting system, because those are the ideas that we are talking about. And we are talking about all the madness of climate policies,
Absolutely.
Things that are imposed on the economies that basically make those economies of those states each and every year weaker.
Absolutely.
What's the reason for this?
So the European Union, the other aspect of being a power without a people is that it doesn't really owe its existence to a democratic voice. The European Commission effectively is appointed. It's not elected. So and it's the only authority in the EU that can actually propose.
But they claim that this is the result of the election process within the states of the European Union, and based on this, the European Commission is an effect of kind of agreement between political powers.
But there's no accountability for the Commission. No accountability. We can't remove them as the people of Poland or France. I say we. Thankfully, we're not actually a member of the EU technically. I'll come to our exit from the EU in a second.
I'll ask you about the Brexit.
But you've got no ability to hold the people in the European Union to account, particularly the Commission, which is the only entity that actually proposes new laws. And so they're not thinking about the economic interests and the benefits of the people of Poland. What they're thinking about is the benefit that they accrue to themselves as the power in Brussels. And anything that promotes their power is a good thing for them. They're not too concerned about your suffering. And let me tell you, I mean, you talk about economic suffering. Germany is having an economic cardiac arrest because of European Union policies. First of all, Germany ditched nuclear power. It then hitched its wagon to cheap fossil fuel sources in Russia. And And on the back of that, it decided, having done all of that, removing nuclear power, getting completely stuck into Russian fossil fuels, it decided that it was going to kill its strongest industry, which was the internal combustion engine, the cars with internal combustion engines.
Pure madness.
True madness. And it would, at the same time, cut off its fossil fuel access with no demonstrable alternative that could power Germany. So Germany is in real economic trouble.
Yeah, but Germany is also a political powerhouse of European Union. It's a contradiction. You just mentioned it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's pure madness, but this is madness in progress. Nothing
Germany, I have some friends in German politics, and what they tell me, and it's a great tragedy, I think, for Germany. Of course, Poland has some bad experiences with Germany.
Welcome to Central Europe.
As we know. Well, your experience was marginally worse than ours. But the tragedy for Germany, and I hope the Polish people can see this, is that Germans are brought up to be ashamed of Germany. And, of course, World War II was horrendous. The Nazis were awful. What Germany did in World War II was unforgivable. But that has been used by the European Union as a mechanism to dumb down national pride in Germany. And by beating the German people down, by making them ashamed of being German, effectively, the EU has been able to promote its ideology over and above and to the detriment of Germany's ideology. And this is something I've spoken to, as I said, to a number of German politicians about. And they find it very hard to make a case for a proud Germany, a resurgent Germany, because it has all the connotations of what I've just described.
This is the wider problem, because in many ways, the very idea, the idea of the sovereignty of any nation, of any state, is actually against the so-called sovereignty of European Union. No such thing exists. There is no thing like a European demos. I'm a citizen, proud citizen of Poland. A friend of mine can be a proud citizen of Germany. Somebody else can be a proud citizen of France. But we are not a one political nation. We got different, very often contradictory interests. So there is no European sovereignty, but on the other hand, there is a big attempt to artificially create something like European sovereignty.
I mean, the EU despises the existence of its member states. Let's just be clear. The EU wants member states to cease to exist and for the EU to become the government. And we know that because the EU proposed a constitution like a country back in 2005. And it couldn't get its way because there were a couple of referendums in Europe which rejected it. So it did it through the back door with the Lisbon Treaty. And if you look at the EU now, the EU has all the trappings of a nation state. It has president, it has its own court, it has its own parliament, it has its own national anthem.
And currency.
It has its own currency. And one more thing, I just want to say one more thing. It is developing rapidly its own military. It's got Frontex, which is a border force, wearing EU badges on member state soil. Can you imagine? Effectively foreign militia acting in nation states.
And this is very interesting. We actually had on our program the former head of Frontex who was kicked off his position because he was actually trying to protect the borders. But I would like to have before we move to the Brexit issues, your take on one more thing. Germany is the only state that is actually benefiting from existence of euro as a currency. And many claim that actually European Union is just a kind of a mask that Germany politically uses with their influence as a political powerhouse to execute its interests and try to impose its visions on smaller states. Greece was an example of that thing. And you have your own experience regarding the Brexit times when you were voting for exiting European Union. You were pushed hard by Germans on one hand not to do this. But on the other hand, many claim that actually Germany was interested in European Union without Great Britain, without England, because of your political, your financial power, which was dangerous for Germany.
Yeah, so I think when we were members of the EU, we definitely acted as a check on the progression, the rate of progression of the EU in its desire to become a nation state of its own, as kind of a supranational state, if I can call it that. And we've left. But you're absolutely right about the euro when you say that it favors Germany. You know, effectively, the euro is weak because of member states that have got economies that are much weaker, or had traditionally been much weaker than Germany's, keeping the euro suppressed, allowing Germany to sell its goods, which, you know, it used to be a prolific exporter. I mean, I don't know what.
It still is. Even
it still is. But the future's not looking so bright for Germany. But let's just talk about the current state and, you know, how it's been in the last few decades. It basically made Germany a supercharged exporting machine. And the relationship, you mentioned Greece, the relationship with Greece was very interesting, because when you look at Greece joining the euro, and you then look at the trade deficit that Greece had, the trade deficit with Germany just went through the roof. And of course, what was happening was that euros in Greece, and people in Greece were borrowing in euros, buying German cars, and the loans for those German cars were all being made by German banks. And you created a kind of Ponzi scheme of trade between Germany and Greece, where Greece's debts were going through the roof, German bank loans to Greece were going through the roof, the German car industry was doing great, but they created a really big problem. And then when Greece collapsed, I think in 2012 by memory, the German banks couldn't tolerate the bad debt that was created by the trade that had taken place for the previous 15, 16 years. And that debt was then handed over to the European Central Bank, effectively burdening all of Europe.
Which was politically ruled back then by the German politicians. There's a great book of a former finance minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, about the process that you just described. Ben, but I would like to have your opinion about the Brexit itself. And let me start with the unfamous quote of a current Polish prime minister who was a president of European Council that day. There is a special place in hell for politicians who vote for Brexit. What's your take on those words and on the process that we are witnessing in a way still?
So, isn't it extraordinary that any individual who believes in democracy could say that there's a special place in hell for people who wish their country to be a sovereign nation? And that statement attests to the contempt in which Europhiles hold patriots, effectively. And, you know, we haven't got Brexit. We haven't actually left the EU. The United Kingdom, it's important to understand this, the United Kingdom has left the Commission. We've given up our seat on the European Court of Justice. We've given up our seats in Parliament. We've given up our representation in the Council. But what we haven't done is remove ourselves from the morass of EU regulations, directives and laws that had made life so difficult for us. Indeed, we've left Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, in the EU. I brought a case. I personally brought a case, along with a couple of other like-minded individuals, a case against the British government for the signing of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was part of the deal that Boris Johnson did to get us out of the European Union. Now, the Northern Ireland Protocol, I mean, the name sounds so boring, doesn't it? You just consider the name and you think, I'm going to switch off at that. But the Northern Ireland Protocol was the grappling hook, if you know what I mean, that the European Union used into the flesh of the United Kingdom to make sure that we could never properly leave the EU.
So you left the political leverage that you had as having a position in the European Commission, seats in the European Parliament, in the European Court of Justice, but you couldn't leave the regulations that were imposed on you even after Brexit?
Because we had a parliament in the United Kingdom which was anti-leaving the European Union. And, you know, actually, Michał, we've been in constitutional turmoil for the last 8 years, 9 years, because of that vote to leave. We still haven't settled British democracy. People used to look at the United Kingdom as a bastion of stability, the mother of modern democracy, where right always prevails. The democratic voice will always prevail. But we've had a parliament, we have a representative democracy, like Poland, and we have a parliament that is against the people. And that hasn't changed yet. It is changing. It is changing, frankly, across Europe. We can talk about that. But leaving the EU was never going to be a binary process. It was never going to be one day in, one day out. We still have to fight the fight. I'm still fighting the fight to get us out of the EU.
It's incredible. Many years after the voting actually happened, and many years after technically Great Britain left the European Union. We do not have much time, but I do want to have your opinion about what do you expect after Donald J. Trump becomes president of the United States in terms of relations between Great Britain and the United States, transatlantic security relations, and the whole common sense policy that tend to, well, I look at it as a hope, to come back to the Western politics.
So Western civilization, not just the United Kingdom, but Western Europe, the United States, the United Kingdom, collectively, I think is facing an existential threat. And that existential threat has been created through what I would call the liberal global order, of which the European Union is a significant component. And this is this narrative that all policies need to be made for the global good, and we forget about the nation states. And we see that through the rampant form of immigration that we've had in Europe, the United States and the UK, including illegal migration, which we seem unable now to protect our own borders, something I just can't understand. Trump recognizes the threat to Western civilization, and Trump is a nationist. He believes in strong borders, policies for the United States of America, deregulation, lower taxes. He believes in a strong, proud United States. That changes the entire direction of political travel in Western civilization. And I hope that we get on the same bandwagon and can be saved by that change in direction.
Ben, hope to have you again on my program next month. If you're going to be around, let's make it our habit. Thanks for having you. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for being a guest of Telewizja Republika. See you soon.
Thank you.
Ben Habib, ladies and gentlemen, and this is Telewizja Republika. This is a house of the freedom of speech.